As I stood alone in the kitchen, a soft voice whispered behind me,
"Hey, what are you doing in here?"
I turned around, and there was nobody there. For as long as I can remember, I've been collecting stories that don't fit. Ghosts, UFOs, strange creatures, glitches in reality, the unexplained and the deeply unsettling. For decades, I've sought out these stories, listened to the people who experienced them, and written them down. I'm Scott Weimer, and this is The Ghost Collector. This story came from a man who had recently purchased a family cabin. When he shared the experience with me, this is how he described it. I've had plenty of paranormal experiences, but what happened one weekend still chills me to the bone. Mary, our 3 young sons, and I were spending the weekend at our family cabin, a place we'd only owned for about 6 months. From the very first day, I'd seen things out of the corner of my eyes. Shadows, strange lights flickering, movement where there shouldn't be any, but nothing compared to what I experienced that night. My family had been out hiking all day in the big trees. We were all wiped out by the time we got home long after dark, and everybody started getting right into their pajamas. I wanted a snack, so I crept into the kitchen for a late-night taste of the pan cookies my wife had baked earlier. As I cut off a piece, a soft, breathy whisper drifted through the air, just behind me.
"Hey, what are you doing in here?"
The voice was so close, and the feeling of somebody hovering over my shoulder was real. I just assumed it was my wife, and I turned around with a smile on my face, ready to hand over a cookie. But the kitchen was empty. I called out, "Mary?" thinking she had just gone around the corner into the living room. There was no reply. That was weird, I thought. Then I turned back to the pan and started cutting again. Then, clearer this time. Closer.
"Hey, are you going to eat a cookie? I want one."
The voice was unmistakably female. Playful, but wrong. I spun around, this time sure that my wife had to be there messing with me. But there was nobody. I dropped the knife on the counter, left everything as it was, and practically ran through the cabin, bursting into the bedroom where Mary was propped up in bed, scrolling on her phone. She hadn't been in the kitchen. She hadn't spoken a word, and the boys were in their bedroom across the hall with the door closed. I told her the story, and she could see how freaked out I was. She ran through the possibilities of what it could have been. Air conditioner vent noises, somebody outside the cabin playing a trick, my phone. But it couldn't have been any of those things. Our cabin was on a dark, lonely road where cars rarely passed, and there were no full-time neighbors. I told her that if I didn't go back into that kitchen now and conquer my fear, then I would never feel comfortable in this cabin again. I got out of bed and turned on lights as I crossed the living room. The kitchen was as I left it. Silent, empty, except for one thing. The sharp butcher knife that I'd been using to cut the cookies was balanced on top of the teapot lid. There was no way I left it like that. It wasn't an easy thing to replicate when I tried doing it myself. I grabbed the knife and took it back with me to the bedroom, and the next day I installed a lock on the knife drawer. The next night, the cabin remained quiet. I was almost ready to dismiss what had happened. Almost. Until I got into bed. Lying on my side, drifting towards sleep, I felt it. A small, deliberate tug on my sleeve. I held my breath. I opened my eyes. There was nothing there, but there was a whisper right against my ear.
"Mom."
And then another.
"Dad."
The voice was small, obviously a kid or someone trying to sound like a kid. But there was no one there. I bolted out of bed and crossed the hall in 3 steps, throwing open the door to my son's room. All 3 of them were fast asleep, and undisturbed. I stood there, heart pounding. I heard it again. Muffled words, just beyond the threshold of understanding. Something else was in that cabin with us. Something watching, something messing with me. After that weekend, things calmed down. There is one recurring incident since then. When I'm there on a quiet weekday, working on cabin upkeep, I will often hear my voice called. There's never anyone there. I've been so convinced that someone has opened my front door and called my name that I've rushed downstairs to see who it is. But there's never anyone there. It always sounds female, and I always wonder if they're looking to see if I have any cookies. A big thank you to David for trusting me with that story. There's something about those small, personal experiences, the ones that don't come with proof, just a memory and a chill. For this first episode, I wanted to include a mix of stories, ghosts, strange encounters, and the kind of unexplained moments that don't fit neatly into any one category. This next one is from my own teenage years, out on the rural back roads of Central California. Back in the late 1980s, when I was a bored teen in the Central Valley, my friends and I spent a lot of nights doing what bored teenagers did before cell phones, social media, and endless entertainment in your pocket. We drove around. That was it. We'd pile into somebody's car, scrape together a few dollars, maybe grab sodas from 7-Eleven, and then head out into the country. There wasn't a whole lot to do in our area back then. Or maybe there was, but none of it seemed as interesting as the rural back roads of Central California after midnight. Those roads had a certain feeling to them. And they still do. Long stretches of empty pavement, orchards on both sides, irrigation canals running black under little concrete bridges, old barns leaning just slightly in the dark, dirt roads that seem to lead nowhere, but if you followed them far enough, you might find the remains of an old homestead, an abandoned house, or a long-forgotten lot where somebody used to live. We loved that stuff. We explored empty farmhouses, dead-end roads, forgotten driveways, places where the lights of town disappeared behind us and the night opened up in every direction. Over the years, we had quite a few strange experiences out there. Some of them had easy explanations. Some probably did, even if we never figured them out. But there's one memory I've come back to recently, and the more I think about it, the stranger it seems. Because at the time, we saw something in the sky that none of us could explain. And the oddest part is, I don't remember us being as shocked as we probably should have been. It was just another night. We were parked on the side of some long, dead-end country road, miles outside of town. I couldn't tell you the exact road now. After all these years, those nights blur together a little, but I remember the feeling of the place. Deep rural farm country. No city lights, no busy intersections, no houses close by, just fields, orchards, dark utility poles, and the quiet hum of countryside at night. We were probably 10 miles from the nearest town, maybe more. We weren't doing anything important, just standing around, talking, wasting time, being young. Then one of my friends looked up and said something about the lights. At first, I don't think the rest of us understood what he meant. Then we looked. Above us, or nearly above us, there was a pattern of lights moving across the high cloud cover. That's the detail that's always stayed with me. There was high overcast that night. And on that cloud layer, these lights were moving. The closest comparison I can make is those old promotional spotlights they used to set up in parking lots in the 70s and 80s and even into the 90s. You'd see them outside a movie premiere or a grand opening or a new car dealership. Big white beams sweeping back and forth across the sky, letting everyone know from miles that something was happening. It was kind of like that, but not really. Because these weren't just beams waving around. This was more precise, more intricate. It almost looked like watching one of those little kaleidoscope toys we had as kids. The light would start as a small point, then spread outward in a spinning shape, almost like a wheel or a flower opening up, and then it would spiral back down to a point again. Point, wheel, spin, back to point, and then it would happen again, over and over. Fast. Each cycle took maybe 3 seconds. A tiny bright center would bloom outward into this rotating pattern, then collapse back into itself. The light was mostly white, but there were hints of blue in it. Little flashes or edges of blue mixed into white as it spun. It was beautiful in a strange way, but it was also deeply odd, and it was really wide when it was at its widest point. It's impossible to guess how high it was, or how wide it was. A very rough guess would be half a mile wide. But it could have been 10. Who knows? We sat there and watched it, trying to make sense of what we were seeing. Someone threw out an explanation that maybe it had to do with farming, some kind of equipment, some kind of operation happening out in the fields. That sounded reasonable enough to a group of teenage boys standing in the middle of farm country. Out there, you could convince yourself almost anything strange was probably agricultural. A pump, a crop duster, a tractor light, some piece of equipment none of us understood. But looking back now, that explanation doesn't really hold up. Since I was young, I've always watched the sky. I used to sleep in the backyard and stay awake for hours staring at the sky, and I never saw anything like this. Because the lights weren't coming from the ground in any obvious way. We didn't see beams, we didn't see a source, we didn't see a truck parked in a field, or a tower, or a crew working somewhere nearby. The pattern was nearly overhead, and it was high enough, or at least projected high enough, to be playing across the bottom of the clouds. Also, it was too fast. Those old spotlights swept across the sky in smooth, lazy arcs. This thing opened and closed like a mechanical eye. A pinpoint expanding into a spinning wheel, then spiraling back into itself every few seconds. And then there was the location. We were nowhere near a theater opening, nowhere near a car lot, nowhere near anything that would have had any reason to advertise itself with lights in the sky. There were only a few small towns scattered around us, and we were well outside of even those. No music, no event, no crowd, no glow on the horizon. Just us, the empty road, and that strange white-blue pattern moving on the clouds. The thing I find most interesting now is how casually we accepted it. We didn't panic, we didn't race home. We didn't spend the rest of the night telling everyone we had seen a UFO. We just watched it, talked about it, tried to explain it, and eventually, like a lot of teenage memories, it got filed away with all the other strange things that happened on those late-night drives. But here's the part that makes it even harder to dismiss. We saw it more than once. Not every night, not all the time, but on several different occasions, while we were out in the deep rural country, we saw that same kind of light pattern in the sky. The same cloud cover, the same strange movement, the same pinpoint opening to a spiral shape and then collapsing back again. And each time we simply watched it, but didn't obsess over it. Maybe because when you're young, you don't always know which moments are going to stay with you. Maybe because of being out in the country at night, under that high ceiling of clouds, the impossible doesn't feel quite as impossible. I've thought about it again recently, and now, all these years later, I can't come up with a good explanation. It could have been some sort of spotlight. I've never seen anything like it, though. Maybe there was a piece of equipment or a promotional light source far away that somehow projected onto the clouds in a way I didn't understand. I've gone back and asked my friends who were with me, and they also remember it, but also can't explain it. It could have been something perfectly ordinary, made strange by distance, weather, and teenage imagination. But I don't know. I remember the speed, I remember the pattern, I remember the white light with traces of blue. I remember sitting on the side of a dead-end road, surrounded by farmland, watching the sky open and close like a glowing kaleidoscope. And I remember thinking it was strange. Now we move from looking up and seeing something you can't explain to looking down a hallway and seeing something that shouldn't be there. It was shared by Sarah, and for this story, Monica will be stepping in to tell it.
About 25 years ago, I lived in a small house in Ceres, California with my husband and my 2 little boys. They were toddlers at the time. My husband worked a job with odd hours, and at that point in time, he was working graveyard shift. My sons were about 2 and maybe 4 years old, and I worked during the day and stayed home with the boys at night. The house had been in my husband's family for years, going back to when he and his brother were little kids. While I knew it was an older family home, I'd never personally experienced anything strange there, not until one particular evening when my husband was working graveyards. That night, my husband was at work. It was around midnight. I was in bed. I was having trouble falling asleep, so I decided to sit in bed and read. I then turned off my bedside lamp, closed my eyes, decided to try and sleep. I had just started kind of settling in when I heard movement in the hallway. Because my older son was potty training at the time, my first thought was maybe that he'd gotten up to use the bathroom, so I thought I'd maybe get up and try to help him out. I got out of bed quietly and I walked to the bedroom door, which was already slightly open. I pushed the door open a little farther and looked down the hall toward the bathroom and my son's bedroom. That's when I saw them. There were 2 young boys that walked down the hallway and turned into my kid's bedroom. But something about them was wrong. They weren't dressed like my kids. They were wearing old-fashioned clothes, worn overalls with loose suspenders, some simple button-up t-shirts, and flat caps. The kind you'd see newspaper boys wearing in old photographs. Both kids were barefoot. For a second, my mind tried to make sense of it. I thought maybe the boys had somehow found costumes or old clothes and put them on and were playing at night. Maybe I was half asleep, but none of it really made sense. I rushed down to the hall to look in my kids' bedroom, and my sons were both sound asleep in their beds. They were wearing their Star Wars pajamas. They were tucked in just as I'd left them, and they were both in a deep sleep. And the baby gate in front of their bedroom door had not been moved. That was when I realized the 2 boys that I had seen walk into their room were not my children. After the incident with seeing the little boys, I started to feel differently about the house and sort of felt uneasy. My husband and his brother had grown up in the house, and on occasion, my brother-in-law would come and visit us. And typically he'd stay overnight in the house with us. He usually slept in the guest bedroom. The room had been his bedroom when he was a child. That room was between our master bedroom and my kids' bedroom. Whenever he stayed the night while visiting, I would hear him tossing and turning during the night. Sometimes I'd hear him get up repeatedly, like he was having a restless, miserable night of sleep. Eventually, after he'd come to visit us a couple times, I asked him about it. I basically told him, it seems like you have a hard time sleeping in the house. What's going on? That was when he told me that he'd always felt something in the house and that something was off about the house, specifically in his room. As a child and even as an adult, he said he always felt like when he attempted to lay down and go to sleep, that he'd have the sensation of somebody standing beside the bed watching over him while he tried to sleep. He also shared some strange things that had happened in the house over the years when he and my husband were kids and growing up in the house. Ordinary objects would appear in places they didn't belong. He would catch movement out of the corner of his eye, sometimes like a person, sometimes an animal, but when he looked directly at the spot, there was nothing there. There were unexplained noises too. Footsteps in the kitchen, movement in the living room, the sound of people walking down the hall when there was no one there. And on more than one occasion, the faucet in the hallway bathroom turned on by itself. We only lived in the house for about another 6 months. Around that time, my husband and I found a place out in the country just outside of town we decided that we wanted to purchase and move to. The market was on the upswing, but the house just seemed to sit on the market for probably about 6 months. At first we thought, and we kind of chalked it up to the location, the neighborhood was considered a rougher neighborhood, even though it had been improving over the years. Other homes within our neighborhood, comparable homes, were selling and property values in that neighborhood were going up, but our house just didn't seem to move. After about 3 months, we talked to our realtor about lowering the price or maybe making improvements that might make the house more desirable to buyers. And that was when she told us something strange. She said that there'd been several showings where potential buyers felt uncomfortable in the house. In one case, a woman stepped across the threshold of the front door, stopped, turned around, and walked right back out. She told our realtor she'd gotten a terrible feeling the moment she entered the house and she didn't want to go any further. Another couple toured the house. Both of them became increasingly uneasy the longer they were inside. One of them described a feeling of heaviness and even shortness of breath as they moved deeper into the home. They ended up leaving early before seeing the whole house. Eventually, after we lowered the price of the house sold to a contractor who bought it to flip. I don't know what happened after that. I don't know if he had an easier time selling the home once the upgrades were done. But I do know this. Once we moved out, we never went back to the neighborhood. Not once, not intentionally, not even just to drive by. I can't say we ever sat down and made that decision. Somehow we just never went back.
A big thank you to Sarah for sharing that story, and to Monica for help bringing it to life. I love stories like that because they don't come with easy answers. Maybe it was a haunted house. Maybe it was a memory, family history, and fear all pressing together in one old hallway. Or maybe, just for a few seconds, Sarah really did see two little boys from another time walk into her children's room. Whatever it was, it stayed with her. And that's really what the Ghost Collector is all about. These are the stories people carry with them. The ones they don't always tell at parties, or at work, or even to their own families. Ghosts, UFOs, strange lights in the sky, glitches in reality, encounters with people who felt dangerous, wrong, or not quite human. Moments where the world briefly stopped making sense. Some stories are terrifying. Some are quiet. Some are almost beautiful. And some are just strange enough that years later, you still find yourself asking, what did I actually experience? If you have a story like that, I'd love to hear it. You can send your ghost stories, UFO sightings, glitch in the matrix experiences, strange encounters, cryptid stories, or anything else that doesn't fit neatly into the ordinary world to scott@theghostcollector.com. That's scott@theghostcollector.com. You can also record your story in your own voice using your phone's voice memo and email it to me. Thank you for listening to the first episode of The Ghost Collector. I'm Scott Weimer. And if you've been carrying a story you can't explain, maybe it's time to let someone collect it. Thanks for listening. Music and sound effects used in this episode were sourced from freesound.org and are licensed under Creative Commons Attribution. Special thanks to voice actor Monica Weimer. Full source details are available at theghostcollector.com. We'll see you next week.